All right, welcome, ladies
Yeah.
and gentlemen. My name is AJ. I'm a popcorn robot mentor and UCLA instructor. Today, we're going to meet Nolan Duggar. He started out as a salesman. All he knew is he wanted to work in the video game industry. But without a college degree, all he hit was dead ends. So we're going to learn how he broke through those locked doors and got the job of his dreams. Just as a reminder, after the interview, we're going to take some questions from the audience. So if you guys have any questions, just think about it, and then we'll come back to you at the end. All right. So welcome, Nolan.
What a
All right.
fantastic intro.
Nolan, how are you doing?
Good, good. Man, I'm gonna try to match that energy of yours. That was awesome. Thanks for the introduction.
All right. All right. So, I always want to start from the beginning. So, I had earlier mentioned that you love video games. So, where'd that passion come from? Like, what made you go, like, man, I want to work in the video game industry?
Oh man, I mean, my parents. I don't know if they regret it now because I've successfully made it into the gaming industry, but I think for like my majority of my 20s and my high school years, they probably regret getting me a Super Nintendo at like age 2. That's
Yeah.
where it all started. Super Mario, all those OG games, and then graduated to PC and played a whole bunch of Blizzard games like StarCraft and Diablo, and ended up becoming a sponsor World of Warcraft player for a brief while, which I wanted to like
Oh.
try to pursue that as a career, but it didn't work out. But yeah, that's
Oh.
pretty much in a nutshell.
What's a sponsored World of Warcraft player? I didn't
Oh
even know you were
man,
that.
yeah, so that's something that during high school, like, so back then it wasn't like cool to be a gamer as cool as it is now. So I kind of had like a double life where I had like my friends that I played sports with, and then I had
Right.
my World of Warcraft friends who are still
Right.
some of my best friends.
Uh-huh.
Um, Basically, in World of Warcraft, there's two main things you can do. You can do player versus environment (PVE), which means that you just
Right.
fight the same bosses over and over, or in
Right.
my case, PvP, where you play against other players. And so
Right.
I had a team that we did really well and consistently got in like the top 1%. And so we were picked up
Wow.
by a company called SkillCap that's still around, and they do like educational content for people that want to improve in like World of Warcraft, League of Legends, that type of thing. So
Mhm.
at 15, I was making money just putting up very basic, poorly edited World of Warcraft videos with my squeaky voice telling
Wow.
people how to do certain things. It was hilarious.
Wow. That's amazing. So, what's your favorite game of all time?
Oh man, well, sentimentally, I'd have to say World of Warcraft, but probably recently, I've been playing a lot of Elden Ring. Like I have a
Ah,
after I got into game development a little bit as a hobby, I have a much deeper appreciation for like those big open worlds that just take so much
right.
coordination, thousands of
Right.
people working together to pull that off. And it's like
Yeah.
movie quality. And I
Yeah.
look back to some of the games I played as a kid, like Super Mario, thinking like that was revolutionary at the time.
It
But
was.
you go
Yeah.
look up a game like Elden Ring, just 25 years later, it's crazy
Yeah.
how far we've come.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the most amazing things. Like I know video games have like a bad reputation, but honestly, it's such a gateway drug to people to enter development because a lot of times people play video games and they're like, man, I want to create my own game. I want to be a part of this.
Yep.
And that's like it's such a really positive thing. I
Yep.
mean, of course, people can ruin their lives playing too much video games, but it really is a gateway drug to move into the development industry. I say most developers I meet, they all start off as being gamers.
That's actually how I got started. That's how I found your class originally, and that's how I got interested in programming.
Yeah.
Not to skip too far ahead, but that's exactly how it started for me. Was based on gaming and how do I get into this industry?
Right, right. So you didn't have a college degree. What's your story? How come that didn't happen?
Man, I was too consumed with playing World of Warcraft in my high school years to really care or consider what I wanted to do. I mean, I went to college. I went to community college for a few years out of high school because it was just what I was told to do, and that's what everybody else was doing. So I was like, oh, I'll join my friends at PCC. But like after 2 years there and just kind of getting average C's,
Yeah.
I realized I just didn't have any interest in what I was doing. I picked psychology as a major because I
Right.
thought it was interesting, but
Right.
I think in terms of finding something that I always had that passion for, like I had to be honest with myself that it was video games. And so um, I didn't pursue like a college degree in anything like game related because I sort of just did what a lot of people do, and I fell into sales, which that's how a lot of people just, oh, I don't know what I want to do, but I'm good at dealing with people, so let's try this sales thing. And around that time, Wolf of Wall Street came out, so I was like, oh man, I'm gonna make $1 million, be
Right.
Leonardo
Right.
DiCaprio.
Right. So how do you like sales?
I mean, so for me, like it was never an issue like talking to people and
Hmm.
presenting product and all that stuff. For me, it
Hmm.
was more of like I just never had a passion for what I was selling.
Right.
I worked in so many different industries from like I started out selling newspaper subscriptions, which was fun. You get hung up on the phone, people are mean. They don't like you calling. I don't blame them.
Hmm.
Then I moved over to solar and LED, which I did for a couple of years. And then instead of working for a manufacturer, I went into distribution where I sold pretty much the same thing, but just for a different company. And then I landed my most recent sales job was really at a place that sold cell phone mounts to
Hmm.
like B2B customers. And so
Right.
just a whole bunch of random stuff that on paper doesn't look like it makes any sense, let
Right.
alone translates well into the gaming industry.
So then how did not having a college degree affect your career and what you were able to do?
Well, I would say that for a majority, for the jobs that I was going after, sales jobs, it didn't have too much of an effect. But if I was really serious about climbing in the sales industry and moving up to management and taking over teams, I feel like I definitely probably could have hit some roadblocks.
Hmm.
I didn't pursue sales far enough to where I really feel like not having a degree affected me. But I will say that when I started applying for developer jobs, for anything outside of sales, that's when I noticed like the ridiculous expectations that were on some of these job applications. And I think,
Right.
not to go off on a tangent, but one of my favorite posts was that someone had created this software, this company, and it had only
Yeah.
been out for 2 years. And he saw a post saying that you must have 4 years experience with the software. And he's like, oh, well,
Right.
I only created it 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But it shows you how ridiculous it's gotten with the job
Exactly.
requirements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what made it so you've been wanting to go into the video game industry for a long time. So what made it so difficult to break in? I mean, you were really good at getting to jobs, so how come you were hitting that roadblock with the video game industry?
Um, I would come to find out in my early 20s that the video game industry has a super high barrier to entry just because of how sought after it is. I feel like a
Right.
lot of people in my age group, millennials, and now the next generation coming up, we all had similar experiences with consoles and PC, and people were now getting to the age where it's like I want to get this job, I want to work in this industry and work on some of the games that I played growing up.
Right.
And so for me, not having a degree, not having any relevant professional experience, I mean, it was just my resume would go straight into the trash. Like it wouldn't even
Mm.
get a second look. And, I spent a couple months in between sales jobs sometimes specifically going after low level QA jobs, which at the time, 6, 7 years ago, were paying like $12 an hour. So not even enough to cover wherever I was living at the time. But
Right.
I realized that like if I want to get in, I would rather do it, take a pay cut, work my way up. But I found myself not even getting called back for QA jobs.
Hmm.
So people that were applying for QA jobs had degrees. That's how
So
competitive it was.
so what do you think it was that so why is it that it didn't you couldn't break into into the system? Do you feel like it was because you didn't have a college degree? Is that what the big thing was? Is that the barrier?
Didn't have a college degree. I didn't have connections that I could call on. And I also didn't have any relevant volunteer or professional history.
Right.
Although I was a sponsored World of Warcraft player, there's a difference between playing a game and, working for a company that makes them. And
Right.
so
Right.
for me, the biggest problem was that I had nothing going for me. Like I had a
Right.
sales job, I could talk to people, that's great, but it's not like my best friend worked at Blizzard and said, I can hire you tomorrow. So it was
Right.
definitely, I had to figure out how to get creative and if I was going to break in. And for me, that was just networking, and also continuing to level up my education, but not in like the traditional college degree sense.
Right. Right. Okay. So then, how did you overcome it? How did you end up breaking into the industry?
Man, I guess it starts with the job that I had almost 4 years ago now, where I was selling cell phone mounts, and I knew that I had always wanted to break into the gaming industry, but I never took it as seriously as I had up until that point. And
Right.
the changing factor for me was that starting off at the sales job, they had a territory that was doing about 10 grand worth of sales every month. And my job was to grow that territory. And
Right.
over the course of a year and a half, I think consistently by the time I left, that territory was doing about 110 to 120 a month. So huge upgrade, huge contributions.
Hmm.
Um, but the company I worked for was so cheap that I had to share hotels with my boss, and not just hotels, usually motels. We would travel a lot. We would do trade shows. I was like, look, man, like this, look at everything I've brought to the table. I can't get my own Motel 6 room. Like
Right.
it was at that point where I was on a trip that I was just like, I'm done with this. I gotta get out. And that's when I just did a whole bunch of research online about coding. Um, and my thought was that if I, truly want to do something I love, that would be the way to break in. And so I watched a whole bunch of hype videos on YouTube that said I was going to be a programmer in 3 months, and quickly found out that that was all BS. And I think after 6 months, I completed my first Python tutorial on, I think it was Free Code Camp, one of those free websites. And so
Uh-huh.
after that point, I was like, okay, well, that took too long, and I really want a more targeted approach. And so that's what kind of compelled me to look at meetup groups to see if I could find something that was going on nearby. And
Hmm.
that's exactly how I met you, and that's how I got started in your class.
Mm. So how did coding change things? So what happened? Like once you started knowing how to code, then how did that change the dynamic of your ability to enter into the video game industry?
Well, it's funny because I think I remember on day one of me being there, I told you, I was like, I want to work in the video game industry. I don't mind web development, but it's not particularly my first passion.
Right.
And how do I get there? And
Right.
we talked, and I think although the full stack course doesn't necessarily translate into the video game industry, the way
Right.
that
Right.
I looked at it was that I would have a good knowledge of how programming works in general. And
Right.
as a fallback plan, I would much rather fall back as a web developer than a salesperson, because at that
Right.
point I was done with sales. So for me, the push was like, I want to transition careers. Gaming is my first option, but I am willing to kind of do this roundabout path because I saw a lot of value in just in-person classes and being able to work with you, as
Hmm.
opposed to just going back to college, going through the degree. And I had done enough research at that point too, to where I had heard some success stories about people without degrees getting programming jobs, maybe not
Hmm.
necessarily straight at Google out the gate, but enough to get into the industry and build off of it. And
Hmm.
that's where I had always had that suspicion about just degrees in general, is that for a lot of particular industries, it's not mandatory. Like there are some things like becoming a doctor and stuff like that that I do believe they are, but
Right.
for programming specifically and working in tech, I felt like if I showed enough technical ability
Right.
and knowledge, and I could combine that with enough personality, given my sales background, that I would have no problem uh, landing a job somewhere. And at that point, I didn't know if it was going to be in gaming or working as a web developer or anything out of sales at that point. So
Right.
that's sort of where it all started.
So how did you like coding?
And so coding was like a love hate thing for me. And when I got into it, I was like, oh, this is great. Like I'm flying through these modules. And then we
Yeah.
started to get further on where it's like putting all the pieces together. And
Yeah.
it's still fun. You know what? I didn't even actually think about this until now, but I just picked that Karate Kid song for the intro. And it's so perfect because that's the same metaphor I want to use here, where like you were teaching me how to do things like just print or have a simple calculator, or like all these different pieces that I worked on for a long time, not knowing
Right.
how they all work together. And then
Right.
finally you're like, okay, I want you to go off and I want you to build a mock-up version of Reddit all by yourself. And
Right.
I like, not to say that it wasn't challenging. It wasn't the most challenging thing I did in the class, but like all that stuff that Mr. Miyagi taught me came back with, oh, this is how I do this. This is how I do that. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it was really cool to see it all come together. So my definition of coding is that it was very learning intensive, especially not having a traditional background, but it was very rewarding. It was one of those things that like once you figured it out and once you got it to work without any bugs, it was just a great feeling
Right. Right.
working on software.
So why did you choose to learn in a class? Like, why didn't you just keep learning on your own? Because you did that for a while. Like, what were the obstacles you were running into where you're like, you know what, I need to get more help?
I think for me, it's maybe the same reason why a lot of people would hire a personal trainer is not necessarily that you don't know how to do something or you can't figure out how to get in shape, for
Right.
example. It's more of just like when you commit to something, you've put money behind it, you've
Right.
also decided this is a path I'm going to do.
Right.
Um, it holds you accountable. And for me, um, it was all about accountability and making sure that I couldn't just get lazy and say, "Oh, I'm going to skip coding today," or I'm going to stop doing this. And also, it really helped to have a plan as well as people I could interact with instead of just staring at Stack Overflow posts over and over.
Hmm.
It When you're coming in with like no knowledge, it's really difficult.
Right.
I actually started with C sharp off of a free course I found online and just realized that was a terrible idea because I had no idea what coding was. And
Yeah.
I was just copy and pasting lines of code. And I had no idea how to even break it down into question form to ask Google.
Right.
Um, so that's definitely one of those ancillary benefits is just your technical knowledge of how to find answers. For
Right.
me, grew exponentially to the point where I'm working on stuff now that I've never had direct experience with, but I have enough problem solving capabilities that I
Hmm.
really have to kind of think coding for that really help me just formulate really smart questions and find answers.
Right. Right. So then tell us about what the first video game job you got. Like, so what happened where you're usually every interview didn't work, or you don't even know, you didn't even get into interviews, right? Were you just getting your resume to the trash?
Yeah.
And then what changed over where you're like all of a sudden you're breaking through, you're getting interviews, and then what happened eventually to you getting a job? What's that story?
Yeah. So it was at two companies ago where I was working at that mounting company and I was still in your class. And that project was pretty much our first big project of, hey, we
Hmm.
want you to get a mock up version of Reddit. And my
Right.
thought was like, you know what? Oh, by the way, like for context too, this was like maybe 2 months after COVID like started,
Right.
and so the economy was terrible. And I think I remember even consulting you on this, but I said
Yeah.
like, I'm gonna quit my job. I have
Yeah.
enough saved up right now, and I'm gonna go
Yeah.
full in on making this a reality. And so I took a
Right.
very risky move, which I wouldn't recommend, but for me, I just had enough of sales, and I really wanted to focus on getting that project up so that I could show somebody. And really what I've learned like just applying to places is really just having something to point to as a
Right.
reference that lends you
Right.
some sort of credibility.
Right.
And for me, it started not necessarily with gaming, but a lot of like web developer job interviews that I got on just by networking on LinkedIn. I have a whole approach that we could talk for hours on that,
Yeah.
which is probably better for a separate call. But um, networking with people, being persistent, and then just tracking my progress. Like I did a lot of A/B testing with my resume to see like what format works better and how
Right.
do I not get my resume thrown in the trash. And there's automated software that scans your resume to look for keywords. So let's look at the job description that they're hiring for and maybe reverse engineer some of those words into your resume so you don't get auto rejected. Like there's a
Right.
whole bunch of stuff. The Basically that led to me going on a couple of interviews for web development positions in particular,
Right.
um, getting to some final stages, but not getting an official offer. And I was at the point where I needed to take a job, and I had found a job in the gaming industry for
Right.
account management, which was still in line with sales, but it was kind of my way in by using my expertise. But
Right.
the only reason I got that job was because of uh, that website that I hosted, which I
Right.
showed on the interview, as well as
Right.
like some of the development that I learned myself,
Right.
because that actually helped catapult me into learning game development on my own with my cousin, which we did
Right.
for a couple of years. And so by
Right.
the time I interviewed, I had like a website that I coded from scratch. I had an unfinished game, but I had enough technical ability to be able to show like, hey, I programmed this. This is all self-taught, and I have
Wow.
the sales background. So that's,
Wow.
that's sort of where I was coming from.
And how did that lead to the job you have today?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, it wasn't like that happy ever after when I got that first job in the gaming industry. They had hired
Mhm.
me at a time where they were pivoting their entire business model, and they were doing art as a service for the gaming industry. And then they said, well, we're going to stop that. We're going to drop 90% of our current clients, and we're going to pivot into the NFT market.
Hmm.
So they totally switched. The job that I was hired on for was quickly becoming unavailable because I was letting my clients know, like, hey, after this last round, that's pretty much it for our relationship, and we can recommend you. So I saw the writing on the wall, but it eventually ended up with me getting laid off. To I wouldn't say no fault of my own, but I'd say I don't take a huge ownership in getting laid off from that. It's just kind of
Yeah.
unfortunate things that
Right.
happen, and it was
Right.
only about 4 months that I was there.
Right.
Um, So when I was looking for a new job, that again, I, in addition to continuing to work on some of the stuff that I was working on with my cousin inside of Unity and building out more games, I also put together like a quick portfolio website to show everything I had done up until that point, just to make it super easy for anybody that was interested in potentially hiring me to just click on it and say, oh, okay, that's what he does.
Yeah.
The funny story about that is the company I currently work at now, Super League Gaming. I went through 4 rounds of interviews, and 3 out of the 4 people thought I was a developer. They didn't even know I had a sales background. And
Wow.
so that just sort of lends credence to the fact that it doesn't really necessarily matter what you do or what your experience is. Like, for all intents and purposes, I could have driven a UPS truck, but
Right.
I was on the call answering questions intelligently, and
Right.
that's all they needed to hear. And so my experience, like, my boss told me 2 weeks after I got hired, like, I knew you worked in sales, but I didn't know you never worked as a professional developer. And I was like, wow,
Wow.
that's just, maybe take a better look at the resume there. It's because that's how I formatted it too, though. That was
Right.
like one of my tricks, is like, how do I let people know that I want to transition into development, but it hasn't been something I've done professionally. And
Right.
so my strategy is, like, usually for a resume, you have your work history up top with your projects on the bottom, but I
Right.
decided to flip the format and put
Right.
all of my all of my skills that would be pertinent to a development job up at the
Right.
top, and I put my work history at the bottom. But
Right.
everybody thought, because nobody takes the time to fully read a resume, everybody thought I was a developer.
Right.
So, that came after a lot of just persistent job applications and following up, and really just had enough showmanship in the interview, as well as the ability to answer some of these questions that they had about how would I handle certain situations. Um, I had just had enough experience at that point, like going through a whole bunch of interviews and figuring out the right way to interview, that
Right.
by that time, it really wouldn't have mattered what I did for a living. I pretty much already had it.
Right.
And so that's what led me into here, which um, fortunately for me, my biggest concern was that I could get into the gaming industry but couldn't transition out of sales.
Right.
But this role is project management, so it's my first step away from almost a decade long career in sales, which has been great, because that's been
Right.
the main thing I've been concerned about, is how do I get away from sales? How do I get away from the ups and downs with commission checks and
Right.
my income being tied to when a project closes? Like, I wanted to be done with that, and I wanted to work
Right.
on something where I could show up, enjoy what I was doing, and that sort of just led me into project management.
So when you're hitting the roadblocks, basically to sum it up, so when you're hitting the roadblocks, what was happening is that you couldn't break in because you didn't have the relevant technical experience. So then once you had the technical experience and then you kind of created your own games on your own time and had your own projects, then you're able to showcase that, put on your resume, showcase it to your interviews, and that kind of convinced them to take a chance on you. And even actually, they didn't even realize they were taking a chance on somebody who had never worked in the industry as a developer because you have such much technical experience that when you're answering the questions intelligently, they can't even tell the difference between someone who's a developer and somebody who's a salesman by career.
Exactly. I mean, and to give you like a full circle on that whole thing, I've been in my company now for close to 4 months, and the most technical thing that I've done is I've gone inside of Roblox and I've captured some images, and I've spoken with some developers that actually build out our levels for clients.
Right.
But that background allows me to talk to them seamlessly, like they're talking to another developer, and I can get a much better idea and handle on a project because I've done some of that, as like a passion project in your
Right.
class. And so, yeah, that's kind of just like the message that I wanted to drive home, is that like, even though there were roadblocks for me, I figured out what my strengths were, and that was just my ability to talk to people, build rapport, handle rejection, which is a big thing, obviously, when you're applying for a job, especially at a
Right.
company that you want to work for.
Yeah.
Um, as well as just having that persistence. And, I attribute like a lot of that to sales, but I do think it is something that can be improved upon for anybody.
Right. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't realize. So a lot of people, when they're trying to, they have a goal in mind and they're trying to get there. The hard part is that every single one of us has a strength that nobody can duplicate. And
Right.
yours was in sales. And I think that's what makes it difficult to kind of give you the answer, the formula, because you can't do things that I can do and vice versa. I can't do what you can do. And, I think one of the things is to be able to assess your abilities and try to, take an inventory of it and make use of it to get into the system, even if you don't have the specific answer. But yeah, it's really amazing how you're able to penetrate the industry, even though it wasn't, very open to you. Like,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say that you hit the nail on the head there, is that's pretty much just what I wanted to scream from the mountaintops every time somebody asked me for advice or questions about their career, is that like, really, like, find out what your own strengths are. If you're not a salesperson and you're more
Right.
uh, you're better with data, you're better with numbers, you're better with Excel sheets, like you could get really intricate with your level of detail of tracking
Right.
which sites are you applying on, which resumes are you sending, what are your cover letters. Like, there's so many different metrics that you can track that are within your control, to where you can
Right.
say, at the end of the day, it spits out one number. This resume with this cover letter is 10% effective. And you could
Right.
really you could do whatever, plays to your strength. You could,
Right.
really get creative with it.
And what is interesting too is that even though you're really good at sales and getting, you've mastered I think the interview process. Um, the thing is that one still barrier that you needed to overcome was still to get that technical experience that made the difference, that kind of push you over the edge to get to that point. And so it's really interesting that even though you have this huge ability, you still had a minimum requirement threshold to reach before you could break in.
Right. And I hated hearing that, because that's one of the things I've always prided myself on, is like, I'm going to find a way through when everyone else is telling me that there isn't a way through.
Right.
But even I had to take a step back and realize, like, there are limitations to this thing, and you could
Right.
be the most personable person in the world with the most, the best follow-up practices, the best networking tactics.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if you can't convince somebody who is ultimately going to have to take a chance on you, why they should convince their boss on why they should hire you, then no amount of personality is going to be able to compensate for that.
So if you could do it all again, what would you do differently?
Man, straight out of high school, I would have, me personally, I probably would have just focused on the things that I was passionate about. And
Hmm.
so, um, what's funny is that this whole time, like we live in a time where you could Google and you can YouTube tutorials on anything. You can learn how to play guitar at home without ever meeting anybody. Like there's so many resources that are available to you. But
Right.
I think for me in particular, I realized like I would start things, but I usually wouldn't see them through. And if I did, I would lag on it. I would
Right.
procrastinate. I'm a gamer. I would find video games to play. I'd be like, I don't need to do all their adult responsibility stuff, like, you know, bettering myself.
Right.
So
Right.
I think for me, it was really about just what's something that is going to get me to the next level in my career. And for me personally, like it was your class, because
Mm.
it was that consistency to look forward to Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays,
Yeah.
which even if I did no other coding throughout the week, at least I could
Right.
point to that and say I did, you know, 6 to 9 hours in
Yeah.
class. And it's something that's built off of itself over
Yeah.
time. And the funny part is we joke about this all the time, but I didn't directly get a job as a web developer, but
Right.
your class was directly responsible for getting me not only into the gaming industry, but getting me to a place that I I love what I do. It's weird. It's a weird feeling that I haven't felt in, you know, the 10 plus years that I've been working since I was
Yeah.
20. But it's weird, but it's exciting. It feels like I'm just kind of starting my career. And so I guess if I
Yeah.
had to go back and do it again, I guess I just would have started earlier.
Yeah. It's really interesting because there's some psychological thing to it where once you pay for something, you feel like you have to make use of it. It's kind of like why people pay to go to the gym. They could
Yeah.
all just buy weights and never go to the gym, but having that feeling like I'm invested in this, I got to be a part of it. It really kind of focuses your mind. It's a really strange thing. I don't really understand it myself, but it's definitely something there where once if you have a hard time like keeping motivated or disciplined, invest yourself in a program because for some reason, once you have a stake in it, then you take it a lot more seriously for some reason. It's really strange.
Yeah, I mean, I like the analogy of feeling like a gazelle, where gazelles will usually just graze most of the time and just be
Yeah.
super relaxed and chill. But if a lion shows up, like those things run, you know, I don't know,
Yeah.
60 miles an hour, super fast. So
Yeah.
they can hustle. They just choose not to unless motivated by external factors. And for me,
Right.
the external factor was like, let me find a program and get consistent with it.
Right. Right. So now that you're in the industry, what's it like to work in the industry?
And it's awesome. You know, one of the big things that I could never really understand when I would hear my girlfriend talk about is how important it is to be valued at
Hmm.
your company and also have your input matter. For me, I was like, oh, okay, you know, that would be nice if I had it, but it was never something that like I looked for in a company. It was just like, what am I getting paid? What's the longevity look like here? Is the culture good? That's great. But to be at a place where like from week one, I was getting people that were telling me I was doing a good job, and I was like, I've been here a week, and like
Mm.
that that has like consistently happened throughout the months that I've been here. Is people from different teams telling me that they're just thankful I'm here. It's been crazy, but they feel like, you know, they have more time to handle things because I've been doing well. And so for
Right.
me, um, obviously, like working in the gaming industry, everyone wants the work-life balance. For me, it's been very hectic the last couple of weeks, probably averaging more like 60, 70 hour work weeks. but
Woo.
but it's also a weird feeling to where like before, if I was working another sales job, if I had to work even a millisecond over 40 hours a week, I
Yeah.
was already thinking about all the video games I could be playing.
Yeah.
Like for this job, it's like, oh man, like I need to get this done. I want to get this done
Yeah.
before I do
Yeah.
anything else, because I have other people relying on me, and I have people um, who I respect and who respect me. And it's a totally different work environment. So it's awesome, to say the least, man. It's
Yeah.
awesome.
Man, doing what you like and having a good job is so different than hating your job. It's massively different. Your whole life goes from like clouds to sunny days. It's really strange how what how because you're spending like 60 40 hours a week on it, 60 hours a week for you. But man, if you're doing it on something you hate, oh God, it's awful.
Yeah, and it's just a totally different feeling. Like when I started on and I got into a project management position, like even though I'm not directly responsible for managing other people, project management in itself is inherently managing people. And so giving direction, giving orders. And so
Right.
I found myself literally 3 weeks into a company in a role that I've never had before. Um, Leading calls with clients like with like this level of confidence. It was weird because it was almost like somebody more qualified was like speaking through me, and I
Hmm.
like hung up the call and I'm like, wow, that was me. I actually sound pretty good. And like
Wow.
my girlfriend was like, yeah, I heard one of your calls. She's like, actually sounds like you know what you're talking about. I was like, yeah, sounds great.
The
Like
lie.
I, like and not to like let that go to your head or anything, but I think it's just kind of a testament on the journey and what it took to get here. And I don't know how much time we have, but like going into my past of trying to get into the gaming industry wasn't just like a few applications here. It was like years of messaging people on LinkedIn, always tracking new opportunities, calling
Right.
people, following up with those people who I talked to 6 months prior who said, check in with me on this date. Like I would set reminders. I had an Excel spreadsheet that said, this is who you talked to last time. This is what you talked about. Because there's nothing greater than like talking to someone who you is really just an acquaintance, but
Right.
you talk to them 3 months down the road and you remember something specific. Like
Right.
there's no better way to build rapport than be like, oh yeah, you told me last time you just bought your son a bike. How's that going? And it's just boom, right there. That person like went from acquaintance to like, I'm gonna do whatever I can to pass your resume along internally
Right.
at Riot Games.
Right.
And like that was my story, which I interviewed at Riot. And I got through 5 rounds of interviews, which I think in itself was a crazy accomplishment because
Right.
I have friends that have comp sci degrees that have
Yeah.
relevant work experience doing
Right.
exactly what they're applying for. And I applied for this role with just sales experience. I didn't even have any programming uh, like material to show them at the time. So it was just sales
Yeah.
experience. But
Yeah.
I didn't obviously ultimately get the job, but I felt a lot of pride and I knew I was on to something when I could get to
Right.
the last stage interview
Right.
at a big company like Riot with no experience. So I was like, okay,
Right.
I have the approach down. Now I just need some sort of technical skills to back it up.
Awesome. So, what are some surprising things you've learned working on the video game industry from the inside? What's the insider info, the insider scandalous gossip?
Man, so I won't name drop any clients, but some clients we work with, I have to ask myself, like, how is this person working at this big company, one of the FANG companies that you're just like is so sought after, you hear about it all the time, and then you deal with these people, and it's just like this guy's an incompetent idiot. Does he even know what he's
Yeah.
doing? So not to go too much into detail, but I had a project where like originally I wasn't supposed to travel for it, but we were having such a tough time wrangling people from their team and delegating responsibility to the point where I, from my company, was delegating what their team should do because there were all these
Wow.
inner office politics. Nobody wanted to
Yeah.
take ownership. And so eventually they flew me out to New York and just said, like, you're going to be the point person on site
Wow.
and just take control. And I
Wow.
did, but that's probably one of the bigger surprises is that the people that work even at some of these bigger prestigious companies, not everybody is a rock star
Right.
that deserves it. Some people
Yeah.
can fall into it, whether it be connections, whether it be luck, whether it be just how they look on paper.
Right.
But as far as like performing the day-to-day responsibilities, I haven't been asked to do anything that I've ever felt is way beyond my scope. It's all
Uh-huh.
just been, I don't have the experience yet, but I'm going to get the experience of the job, which
Right.
anywhere you apply to that says that you need to come ready to add value from day one is just it's a complete falsity.
Yeah.
Everywhere you go, there's ramp up time before
Right.
you can add value, and I don't
Right.
care where you're at. And so
Right.
I think this has probably been the biggest surprise, though.
All right. So, last question for me. What is your recommendation for people who want to work in the video game industry but with no college degree or technical experience? Like, what would you tell them?
So I would first say that I would do research on what you specifically want to do in the gaming industry. And it took a while to figure out how the roles were broken up. And it really
Mhm.
depends on the company as well. Sometimes you'll have developers that are also leading the creative design for the game if the company's small enough. Other times you might have big companies where you're like siloed off and your whole job is when the player presses play on the client, we want to make sure that it gets them into a lobby and they can connect with their friends. And maybe that's your entire job. So
Right.
I would say clarify what you want to do, what interests you about the gaming industry. Do you like to play video games? Maybe you should check out QA. Do you like to
Right.
design video games? Maybe, if you're more
Mm.
creative, you should look at a design role. Do you like to program and troubleshoot and problem solve? And, then it sounds like programming is more for you. So I
Mm.
think the first step is clarifying what you want to do. Second
Right.
step would be connect with people on LinkedIn. And I can't say this enough, but it's been the biggest free tool for just connecting with people. And
Right.
I'm not even embarrassed to admit it, but when I was on LinkedIn, I had maybe 50 connections. All of them were in sales industries. None of them were at gaming companies. And I did what is probably against the LinkedIn terms of service, where I just looked up random gaming company. I was like, oh, that guy has a cool title, add. Oh, that girl has a job that I think I'd like to do, add. And
Right.
I added a whole bunch of
Right.
people I didn't know. And I would send creative messages based on what I was doing, what I was looking for, maybe something about their profile, just in a
Right.
way to just, hey, I'm interested in what you do. Could you tell me a little bit more? I'm considering a career change. And
Right.
for the gaming industry in particular, you'd be surprised at how much people would be willing to open up about that. And I
Right.
think that's mainly due to they love their job, and people that work
Right.
in gaming are down to earth and approachable. And
Yeah.
I over the course of all the applications I put out, I had a lot of different companies where I just made connections, and I had them, either send me job postings that weren't on the website yet, which you'd be surprised a lot of positions get filled that way internally before it's even posted to somewhere
Hmm.
like LinkedIn,
Hmm.
or just able to redirect me to who I should talk to. And then I would figure out, who do I talk to for this position, and connect with them. And I
Right.
tracked it all in an Excel spreadsheet, which maybe you don't need to get that fancy and detailed, but I
Right.
think it was a good tool just to figure out what I had done, who I had talked to, what was next, and then create a game plan from there. But that would be, I guess, the second step after you figure out what you want to do, is you should connect with people that are doing it. And then the third
Right.
step is, once you have that approach down, you should really just figure out a resource, whether it be, like AJ's class for me in particular worked really well. If it's
Right.
self-study and you're not sure if you're
Right.
interested yet, doing some research online and really just being open to learning, I think is probably the best advice I could give.
That's really good. That's super, super smart. So 3 steps. It's first understand the industry, know what you want, kind of reach out to the people who are in the industry, and actually you could probably get a lot of information to what you want to do and how to make yourself attractive. And then number 3, basically create your prototypes, create your stuff so that you have something to show off in the interview process. That's really smart. That is really targeted, and it kind of gives you exactly what you want. That's really smart. It's a really
Yeah,
cool.
and I don't want to go on a huge rant and tangent about the job application process, because I could forever. But
Yeah.
one of the biggest things that I will harp on is that a lot of the times the people writing these descriptions, it's really more of a wish list.
Right. Right.
Oftentimes they will interview people that maybe only have one or two of the requirements, but at the end of the day, that may be the only thing you're really doing. And maybe the other
Right.
things would be nice to have.
Right.
And all of those, to get past all of that red tape, you can't just go with the approach of, I'm going to apply. If I hear back, great. If not, forget about it. Like,
Right.
there's so much opportunity that's left on the table by people that could just simply make a note to follow up in a week or two. I mean,
Right.
all the information is available, and I think LinkedIn is the best tool, because when you apply for jobs on LinkedIn, 95% of the time it'll show you who is directly responsible for hiring for that role.
Right.
And think about how that sets you apart. There's hardly anybody out there that is willing to go the extra mile to say, I've researched the company, I've crafted a cover letter that includes some notes that I think resonates well with your mission statement.
Right.
And on top of that, I've researched a little bit about your background and your industry, and I've incorporated some of those keywords into my resume. And
Right.
now you come to the table and you can have a conversation, and it just looks so much better than
Right.
if I get in, I get in. That's a terrible strategy.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I would love to talk to you more about that. But does anyone have any questions that they want to share? I want to open up to people. I don't want to take up the whole time.
I thought you were not going to give us at least 5 minutes.
I know. Sorry, he has some really good
Sorry about that.
answers.
I went on. I ramble.
All right, go ahead. What's your question?
No, I'll let people ask questions because I have a few, but
Okay.
I want to take up Nolan's time.
Sherry Jindo, is that you, Jindo? Rich, do you guys have any questions? Sam, do you have any questions?
Not so far. But I mean,
Yeah, I'm good.
Go ahead, man.
Okay, yeah. Whoever wants to go first. Rich, do you have a question?
No, I was saying I'm good. I have no questions so far.
Okay. Jindo, did you have a question?
No, but it's so interesting. I mean, I want to connect it with Nolan, right?
Yeah.
Nolan. Okay.
We'll bring him into class so he can kind of give you even more one-on-one talk if you want.
Yeah, maybe in the future.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Sherry,
I'm also going to drop my LinkedIn in chat. If you want to add me, message me anytime. If there's something you're interested on, hey, this is an opportunity that I'm interested in applying for. How would you go about doing it? I'll totally take time to help you out with that. So anybody here, just message me anytime.
okay. Let me ask Sherry's question. She said, will you tell us more about the game industry? What languages are you using? What are you guys looking for in terms of candidates? Like what makes someone attractive to the video game industry in terms of being hired? And
yeah, so my specific team in project management, I'm not hard coding any of the games that we're using, but I know that a lot of our developers are using the same language that is built off of in the Minecraft and Roblox world, because those are the two big games that we do customize levels in for big companies.
mm-hmm.
And so that would just go along with C++, I think is one of the core languages. C# is always useful, that I use sometimes when I'm programming for myself. And really, I wouldn't recommend starting with either of those if you don't have a coding background, though. For me, I tried that and it was just impossible to understand. It was very complicated. Those languages are not intuitive and really shouldn't be a starter language. So I would say, like, first time coming in, no coding background, you're interested about it, Python is hands down the best language, just because it's one of those things that you could look at it with almost no coding knowledge and say, oh, I could kind of understand how that works.
Right.
So I would say get a base level understanding of Python. And again, as far as like what they're looking for when they hire people, I think people that are really easy to work with and are able to take constructive criticism, and also people that are able to convey their ideas in a way that is personable when they're having to talk with other teams, because developers in particular get a bad rap sometimes about being tough to work with. They have an ego. So if you can be that developer that comes in and you're easy to work with and you're fun and you get stuff done and you're competent, you're gonna be way above anybody else.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Pink Cashmere, do you have a question?
I do have a question, 2. Well, I have 3, but it's okay. I don't have enough time to ask all those questions. So question 1, for people that are not in gaming industry, what do you recommend for them to do? So earlier you mentioned that your boss did not realize that you actually also have salesman background. So people that are coming as a coder, not in gaming industry, what do you recommend them to apply for a job? Like, I hear a lot of coders that all they do is coding, but they are having a hard time finding a job. So what do you recommend? Should they do something other than coding? Like, for example, I like real estate. So should I be going into a real estate industry because that's what my passion is? What is your recommendation on that?
Well, I would say if first of all, my number one rule is just kind of following what you're passionate about, whether that be coding or real estate or gaming. So if you can find a skill set and a job that you like to do in the industry that you like to be in, then that's a perfect match. How do you go about getting there, especially for coders that have trouble? I would say that number one, make sure that you have something that is what you could be considered as client facing. And even though it's not showing, you're not showing it to any clients, you need to have a page that if you were to present it to somebody, they would give you money to develop something. So basically the goal of the programmer, in addition to being really good at programming, is how do I showcase what I've done in a way that is easy for people to click on, like a portfolio website? And how do they understand right away that this is what I do, this is what I've made, and this is my experience? And so making that really clear so that somebody looking at your LinkedIn profile doesn't automatically see, oh, he applied for a coding job, but he has sales experience, so deny. Like, you have to do something that stands out. And for me, on my resume in particular, that's where I flipped the format and I put all of my coding experience that I did in AJ's class and in my personal time up on the top. So that's the first thing people are reading. And that worked extremely well when I was going for jobs that were more coding related and technical related.
Would you be able to show us that resume?
Yeah,
If
I
you
should
have
have it up on
on
my
it.
new computer. Let me
That's
see.
actually really cool to see.
Yeah, I have quite a few here. Let me see.
I want to see the one that got you interviews, even though you had never worked in the industry before. Because that
Sure.
first penetrate the first one that penetrates through is very difficult.
Sure. So this is my screen, and right now you can tell I haven't updated it in a while because this is resume 2021.
That's
But
great.
I've
Perfect.
had business development resumes, which this is where I would apply for any kind of specific roles in the sales industry.
Right.
And so right here, I still have my GitHub. I still have the Ask It project I work on with my game and my contact. But up at the top, this is my experience. And then down here, like, let's be honest, no one is going to make it to this part in your resume if the first thing they see is, oh, business development manager.
Right.
So I had to change my approach when I started getting into game development. And that's when I used a different approach where I put my projects up at top. I mean, this looks like a legit game developer if you didn't know any better.
Right.
The only difference is that it says projects instead of experience, but this is all accurate. I made this game with my cousin, just us two. We figured out how to market it. We figured out how to launch it on the iOS store. We coded it using C# and a visual scripting language.
Nice.
This is another game we worked on, and an unannounced title, which just looks better. It's one of those things that we didn't have a name for it, but we figured, like, you know what, unannounced title sounds really cool and official. Like, we have, some sort of schedule that we're keeping here. And so a lot of it was really about that. The resume, how do I get to it? Another thing was this website that I shouldn't even show you that this was made in Wix, because that's blasphemy coming from AJ's class. But
no way, I use Wix, man.
I was so busy that I was like, you know what? I need to put together something. And this is just very simple. Los Angeles-based cross-platform game developer. I mean, this is all lingo that I took from just stuff that I researched online of how to make it sound good. And this is, my latest work that links to the store. My portfolio, along with what I did on the projects.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Showing some of the scripting that we did for player movement. I mean, all of this would lead somebody, and then unannounced title. Ooh, it's mysterious, even though it's just me and my cousin Blake, So that's what I would recommend. I say you definitely have to have something to point people to say, this is what I do. Even if you don't have a lot to show, it is helpful to just make things and be consistent with it. And you have to get to a good base to where you can figure out what's right for you. And for me, it was a lot of trial and error. When I just had my website up with, the website that I made, I really didn't get too much feedback on my resume. I did get a couple of interviews, but I had way more success when I combined that with this portfolio website and a new resume. And again, not to go too much into it, but you could also, I would write customize cover letters for everywhere that I applied to. And so that takes some time, but it is definitely worth it.
Those images you have on that website on your portfolio, are those yours? Or are they
Yeah, so
all for your games?
yeah, this is taken directly from our home screen that we designed. We designed the
Oh,
graphics
it's
for it.
beautiful.
We designed this level.
Wow.
We
That's
took this clip
perfect.
straight from it, where like this is the visual scripting plugin that we use, and like all of
Right.
this goes into just having this AI move by himself and then attack the player. And
That's
that wouldn't
brilliant.
have even been remotely possible without a coding based knowledge. And
Right.
it's, you wonder how web development translates. And even though, you know, I'm not writing anything specifically in Python, all of that experience helped me figure out all the trial and error that went into just this one script. And
Right.
there are multiple scripts. And so
Right.
I would say if you're interested in coding and gaming, you really have to have a love for problem solving.
Right. Okay, we'll take two more questions and then we'll be called a night. Sherry asks, what did you use to design the visuals?
So we used a lot of programs. I mean, some of them we used, let's see, Blender was probably the main one for animations. And that was a free program that we downloaded. The game engine that we designed that in is Unity, which is free to download as well. And as far as designing the visuals themselves, a lot of them were either asset packs that we bought online inside of the Unity store, because my cousin and I are not artistic, and that was our one downfall, is that we're not good at
Right.
creating art and designing. So a lot of our stuff was really sourced through assets that you can get for really cheap.
Wow,
I want
smart.
to say in combined to launch our mobile game cost about $60 to $70,
Wow.
with probably only about $20 being spent on in-game assets and the rest being spent on licensing fees to launch on Google, the Android store. So really
Right.
just a lot of free tools at your disposal. You really just have to get in there and look at what you need. But there are so many tutorials on YouTube now that if you want to learn it, you can.
Okay. And Simi, did you have a last question?
Yes, I do. So you always beat me at the Who's the Murder games. What is your secret?
What is my secret?
Yeah, because I always figure out the wrong murder. It's
Oh,
always
man.
you.
I don't know. I think at first you accused me, and then instead of just flat out denying it like somebody who is guilty would, I think I tried to ask you some questions like you would do in sales, like you gather some information. Well, why do you think it's me? Are you sure about that? Well, what about him over there? And I start to instill doubt over time to where now you're accusing somebody else that wasn't me, and I'm right behind you, and it was all your idea, right? So that's where the genius is.
That's awesome.
So I take
All
a whole
right.
jump in there myself, pretty much.
Okay.
Sherry, I wanted to answer Sherry's question in chat, but
Yeah.
for licensing, that's specifically for launching on the Google Play Store and launching on the Apple iOS Store. So I know off the top of my head, for to be an iOS developer, if you want to launch a game on the platform, it's $99 a year, and you have to have a Mac in order to port that over, which is why I haven't had it on the iOS, because I haven't had a Mac until recently. So if you wanted to launch something on Google Play Store, I'm not sure. I think it was about $40 to $50 annually. But that's just, those are just some numbers to get you started. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it when it comes to launching a game, but those should give you some good numbers.
You want to give us your portfolio and your LinkedIn link onto the chat in case people want to take a look?
Sure. My LinkedIn profile is here, and pretty much all my stuff for my portfolio should be on my LinkedIn page. So my video game portfolio, the project I did in AJ's class, which is called Ask It, that's right there under the featured part of my profile.
Okay.
And then you can just see my experience as a whole. I could go into depth about LinkedIn and how to use it, but that's probably an hour-long meetup conversation for another time.
Sounds good. The Ask It project. It's like a replication of Reddit.
That's exactly what it is. It's a smaller version of Reddit where you're doing very much the same stuff of users can post, users can upvote the post. So it's a very tricky project, but I felt like after I was done with it, it was complex enough for me to be able to say, hey, this is what I have been working on and this is self-taught. And that's the main thing that I really love to point out is I think Sherry asked what people are looking for. I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's consistent with other industries, but in the gaming industry, people love to see a passion and they love to see people persevere and say, like, I'm not going to let this roadblock of not having a degree stop me. And so if you can take one thing away, I would just say that study what you're interested in, show it to somebody, prove that you're knowledgeable enough to get a job. And it's that simple.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of times you should have hobby projects that really just shows your passion and interest for it. I mean, just compared to candidates, you have one candidate who's only doing what was required, and the other one was like, "Oh man, can I show you this game I created on my own?" Like it just looks completely different. Passion really goes across, and if you love what you do, more likely that they're gonna want to work with you. But why don't you tell us how that game sound, Striga?
Striga, yeah. So that
Nice.
concept came up from my cousin. He was watching a lot of Supernatural, that show that's been on forever. And there's a creature in there called Striga, which is supposed to kidnap children and steal their souls. And so we decided to base our very first game on that, where you're going around a haunted mansion, you're fighting these demonic entities, and your kids have been kidnapped. And so your quest is to get your kids back alive and make it out of the mansion. So that's
cool.
yeah, it's a very scary creature, but it is a good story. It's a great story to tell when you're on an interview, and the people that will really listen and that will resonate with are the people that were in similar positions. And not to go on too long, but my boss's boss is very much a self-made person and made his way into working on movies as a producer for like Marvel movies and Iron Man and stuff like that. And so my story resonated extremely well with someone like that. So there are people out there that believe that there are paths to success that aren't just a college degree.
Cool. All right. So that's all the time we have today. I really want to thank Nolan for being so generous with his time and sharing his experiences. I want to remind everyone that if you want to learn coding as well, on Tuesday the 24th, we have another Python class. If you want to learn Python, a good intro for you. Thank you for attending, and I really hope to see you guys there. And I really hope you guys enjoy and can get a job that you like. That's really such a huge part of it.
Yeah, message me anytime. There's the outro.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right. Thank you, guys.
All right, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, Nolan.
Thank you, Nolan. That was awesome.
Bye.
All right, bye.